Most people never buy their first rental property because they just don't know where to start. In 1995, I was 34 before I ever bought my first property. And now I have over 10,000 doors, just 30 years later. If I had to start over today in 2025, here is exactly what I would do differently. So right out of college, as a lot of you know, I jumped right into property management. And I did that for about 9 years. First, I was in Seattle, and then I moved to Las Vegas. And during that period of time, I learned so much about property management. I was managing small properties, large properties in multiple cities for multiple owners that had multiple rents, multiple expenses, and all of those kinds of things. So by the time I started my first business, when I was about 30 years old, I still didn't have a lot of money, but I ended up buying my very first property in Las Vegas. The property that I first bought was called Vizcaya at the Trails, which is located in Las Vegas, Nevada, which is about Rainbow and Tropicana, for those of you who know the area. It was a 440-unit apartment building originally that was converted to condominiums later. It had 1 bedrooms, 2 bedroom, 1 bath, 2 bedroom, 2 baths, and 3 bedroom, 2 baths. At the time, they were priced below $100,000 for the 1 bedrooms, and my unit, which I bought, was a 2 bedroom, was about $105,000, and the 3 bedrooms were about $125,000. So I decided to buy a 2 bedroom, 2 bath, which was $105,000. In 1995, the interest rates were anywhere from 7 to 9%. And I remember I got an interest rate of about 8%. That put my mortgage payment at around $500 with about 25% down. So I had to come up with just under $30,000. I got a loan for the balance, and my interest rate was just under 8%. So I had about a $200 buffer. However, as you know, I had property taxes, I had insurance, and I had HOA, and of course I had any kind of vacancy or deferred maintenance or anything else. So I ended up buying this property, and it did really well as long as it was full. But when I say well, I mean it was just cash flowing like $25 to $50 a month, depending on what the rent was. And I had this property for quite a while. In fact, I bought a second one, but here's what I learned about buying a condo in a converted apartment building. It's still an apartment building. It just changed the name. What I was still competing against were 400 other people with 1s, 2s, and 3 bedroom units, with all their pricing all over the place. The very first thing that I learned, having a condominium project that was largely rental, made it much harder to find renters, because at any given time, there was always 10 to 20 units to rent at all times. So I was always competing with my neighbors, and I never knew exactly what kind of deals they were cutting, what condition the units were. Some of them were fully renovated, some of them weren't renovated at all, and the rents were all over the map. So it was really hard for me to get consistent pricing and consistent tenants from year to year. So the biggest takeaway there is that I had to be full in order to get that extra $50 a month of cash flow. If I was full for 12 months, it was only about $600 a year of cash flow against about $30,000 down. So not a great return at about 5%. And all I needed was just one vacancy, or the HOA fees to go up, or insurance to go up, or property taxes to go up, or even just a washer and dryer that started not to work anymore that I had to buy. My margins were so thin that I had to be 100% occupied just to be able to cash flow. So that was the first mistake. All I needed was just 1 month's vacancy to wipe out my whole year's cash flow. So as things go up, like HOA expenses, they get passed on to the individual condo owners. So the other lesson that I learned is I try not to buy inside of condominium associations where I don't have control over the common area expenses. So if you are in the situation, you know exactly what I'm talking about. What happened is this particular property eventually needed a new roof. It needed to be painted. There was landscaping issues, and there was things that they had to be done in the parking lots, and the gates were always broken. So all of those things always passed on to the individual condo owners in the form of an assessment or in the form of HOA dues. So those costs also chipped away at my cash flow, further driving home the point that I don't want to buy a rental property inside of a condo project that has really, really fluctuating HOA dues and special assessments. So in preparation for this video, I actually went online and took a look at the property. I haven't really looked at it for years, and I see that those units are for sale for about $230,000 to $250,000. That's cheap for a condo, we all know. But don't forget, I only paid $105,000. So yes, my money has doubled. However, That was 30 years ago. So I would not say that I had great cash flow. I didn't have great appreciation because in 30 years, it only went up just over $100,000. That's just like $3,000 to $4,000 a year. That's all it went up. So why did that happen? It happened because there are 400 units in there for sale. There are 400 units in there for rent. And the competition keeps all the rents down, keeps all the prices down because they're all concentrated into one area and the consumer has lots and lots of choices. So today, I try to buy properties that don't have HOAs. And by the way, we just saw this with Airbnb. So people that are buying Airbnbs try to buy in areas that don't have HOAs because now they're not governed by some other body like a homeowners association. So I try not to buy in HOAs and I try to buy in areas that doesn't have a lot of competition because what I want is when I put my unit up for rent, I want it to be one of the few in the area that's available as opposed to having about 400 others competing for the same tenants. So scarcity is good, especially when you're negotiating with a renter trying to rent your place. And that's exactly the opposite of what I had in this property. The last thing that I realized is I didn't do a very good job of calculating my cash on cash return. So if with 100% occupancy, I'm generating about $600 a year or $50 a month, I'm generating a very low return on the $30,000 that I invested. I'd be better off today just taking that 30 grand and sticking it in a 1 month T-bill at 4%, let's say, where I would be making $1,200 as opposed to fighting for $600 with all my tenants and all the other issues. So before you go out and invest and before you take your money from somewhere else, take a look at what it's earning somewhere and make sure that whatever you do that's making a lot more money than where you're taking it from. So this also rings true with any kind of investors that you might be trying to get. Investors typically look at things the same way. How much money am I making on my money where it's at right now without you? And if I give it to you, how much more will it make? So in my particular case, I was just making about a 2% cash on cash. That's $600 against $30,000 down. So when I start looking at whatever I'm investing in, it better be a significant return, the 7, 8, 9% cash on cash before I pull the trigger. Not to mention all the other issues around HOAs, property taxes, insurance, and tenants, and all the competition, all those other things. So now when I buy deals, I want to be very unique to the market. I want to have very little competition. I want my cash on cash. I want them to be in the double digit if I can get there. And I try not to invest in properties that have HOAs. So for those of you who are trying to make your first investment, just be careful that you're not investing into a huge project because whether it's a condo or whether it's a timeshare or whatever it is, whenever there's a lot of people trying to buy and sell those kinds of things, then you're going to be bumping up against them as far as the competition. However, on the other side of that, I bought a fourplex that was apartments and I actually condoed them and I did extremely well because now I only had 4 of which I sold 3 and rented 1 and I didn't have any competition. So the issue was the competition, not as much as the HOA. However, what I did run into on that first investment, the HOA did incur large expenses after I bought the property that got passed down to all the individual owners in the form of a special assessment. And so the only thing I had going for me was that the property appreciated. And as you guys all know, 30 years later, they're still selling in the low 200s. And so that's only about $3,000 a year in itself. The one good thing is the tenant did pay down my mortgage and I did get some tax benefits because there were so many of them available in that particular block. And there was always a lot of competition for both renters and sales. So if you want to get into a room with a bunch of people with stories like me that have started and made a lot of mistakes, are now navigating very tough markets and finding good deals and finding good financing, you're going to want to join us at limitlessexpo.com. Just click below the link. We have a huge in-person event with 2,000 people the end of July at the Gaylord Texan this year, just like we had last year. We had over 2,000 people last year and it was a huge hit. These people are all confused. If you're confused, you're in the right place because the market conditions can seem daunting and confusing. And that is the entire point of Limitless. So just click below. Hopefully can answer some questions for you and I look forward to meeting you guys there.